Let's see how much Pokemon lore you actually know. Like, why does Mew come after Mewtwo in the Pokedex? And why does Mewtwo get 2 Mega Evolutions? I've been thinking way too much about Pokemon lore over the last 10 years. It's definitely not just a hobby, so I want to share it with you now so that by the end of this video, you are an expert on Mew and Mewtwo. Oh, and see if you can spot the hidden Mew fossil somewhere in this video. So first, the established lore. What is canon? What do we know for a fact about Mew and Mewtwo? It changes depending on the medium we're looking at. We first find Mewtwo, of course, at the very end of Pokemon Red and Blue, awaiting the player in the unknown dungeon as the final boss of the game. This lair is filled with the region's most powerful Pokemon, and it only awaits a worthy trainer. It was later renamed to the Cerulean Cave, and yeah, this is the final prize of the game. In the Pokemon First movie, though, this Pokemon is given much more life and character. It's allowed to speak, and its origins are expounded on as a clone Pokemon created by Dr. Fuji, funded by Team Rocket. While it's unknown if this story was intended to be present in the games, the adventure manga 2 shows Blaine working with Team Rocket and connected to Fuji as its creator, giving part of his own arm, his DNA, into this abomination. In many of its classic depictions, it is a white, alien-esque giant feline creature with a purple tail. But in modern depictions, it takes on more vibrancy, reflecting its psychic nature. This Pokemon is cloned from the DNA of the 151st Pokemon Mew, the new species Pokemon, and their Pokédex entries strike the different tones between them. Mew is said to possess the genetic composition of all Pokemon. It's capable of making itself invisible at will, so it entirely avoids notice even if it approaches people. In Sword's Pokédex entry, it says that many believe that all other Pokemon are descendants of this one. Not that all Pokemon are descendants of this one, just that many people believe it. That might be important later. Mewtwo's Pokédex entries instead speak to its creation. It was created by a scientist after years of horrific gene splicing and DNA engineering experiments, and it is said to have the most savage heart among Pokemon. These Pokemon actually really represent the themes of the early Pokemon games, with Mew representing nature and the whimsical magical world of Pokemon, and Mewtwo representing science and technology and human advancement, and those early games are really about the intersection of these two themes. I will get on to Mew, but first I want to talk a little bit more about Mewtwo. It's heralded as the most powerful Pokemon, and its power is modulated in the movies by way of special armor that allows it to focus and control its rage. Other transformations like Shadow Mewtwo and Pokun represent this Pokemon giving in to the darkness of its heart. And of course we see not one but 2 Mega Evolutions, where one gains the power of the fighting type to join in with the psychic, while the other sees improvements in its special abilities. Given what we know about the ancient origins of Mega Evolution, this is actually an odd transformation in canon for Mewtwo to have, but there are some theories about how this could be explained. This modulation of power and control is what Mewtwo's creator wanted, whether it was Giovanni or some scientific body. The ability to control the most powerful force on the planet. As well as in the original games, there's Fire Red, Leaf Green, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, where Mewtwo exists at a point in the timeline shortly after its own creation, wrestling with its own sentience. However, having come to the realization that my mum has reposted to Facebook not quite knowing where the quote came from, it's not the circumstances of one's birth that defines who you are, but what you do with the gift of life. Mewtwo becomes a protector Pokemon. In the Genesect movie, it looks after weaker Pokemon. In the straight-to-TV special, Mewtwo Returns, it does the same thing. And in Pokemon X and Y, we see it overseeing the Pokemon Village, where Pokemon who have been abandoned and abused disappear into the forest to be looked after by this force of nature. However, there are other realities where this Pokemon does not meet such a happy end. In Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, we meet Giovanni from Team Rainbow Rocket, and this is the first canonical time in games that we actually see Team Rocket did in fact have an interest in Mewtwo, perhaps in the original games, because on his team, after becoming the conqueror of his own universe, Giovanni has in his Master Ball, the blueprints of which he likely stole from Selfco, Mewtwo. Mega evolved as well. He has the most powerful Pokemon that you can have. There are other Mewtwo's out there though. The Genesect movie kind of hints at the idea that there's not just one Mewtwo, but other Mewtwo projects happened all across the Poke Earth. We know that across Ultra Space, or waiting in the Ultra Warp Ride adventures, are other Mewtwo's from other dimensions. And a wild Mewtwo, perhaps the uncaught Mewtwo from X and Y, finds its way into the Max Raid Den to help deal with the unnatural phenomenon that is the wishing star at the center of the den. There is also a Mewtwo that appears in the Romanus Park, but canonically, I'm not quite sure how Romanus Park works, given that you access it via a cartridge slate thing. That's a Game Boy game. Mewtwo also appears elsewhere in the animated series, appearing as a mirage owned by a scientist, suggesting that some knowledge of this Pokemon did make it out to other scientists. In fact, we see in the early animated series a depiction of Mewtwo on the wall of Bill's lighthouse. Canonically, this doesn't make a lot of sense. And of course, in the Detective Pikachu movie, scientists in Rhyme City, who are led by Bill Nye? Bill Nye? They know of Mewtwo, which escaped from the Kanto region 20 years ago. Still, to this day, Mewtwo is considered an incredibly rare and powerful Pokemon, and its DNA came from, well, not just from Mew, but we'll get to that, but also, of course, chiefly from Mew. Throughout its history, Mew is far less accessible, only obtainable through various gifts and from, of course, Pokemon Go, but in the main series, it can only be found in one place. The Pokédex does reference it being from South America, however, many real-world locations have changed over time and been retconned, such as Raichu mentioning being able to electrocute an Indian elephant, changing to Copperaja after Copperaja's creation. So perhaps if there's a South America region, that's where Mew is originally from. So perhaps this is where the event-only faraway island is based, or perhaps it's somewhere just off the borders of Hoenn. It can only be navigated to by Captain Stern using the Old Sea chart. This map directs you far away from the Hoenn region to Faraway Island. There's not much on Faraway Island, it's a sanctuary for Mew, but there is a rotting old sign, and upon investigating, we learn that the author seemed to hope that if anyone was to set foot on the island again, they hope it's a kind-hearted person, lining up with Mew's Pokédex entries, suggesting that it only appears to people with pure hearts. It seems likely that Mew was put here to be protected, either from the eyes of Team Rocket, or just because it is such an incredibly rare and powerful Pokemon. It has access to every teachable move in the game. It also has access to Transform, meaning it can become any other Pokemon, as well as in Alola there being a specific Z Crystal giving it access to the ancient attack called Genesis Supernova, which is the only Z move that sets terrain after use, leaving the battlefield pulsating with powerful pink energy. In lore, it seems to have some connection to the ancestry or genetics of other Pokemon, and it appears in the first movie to have been worshipped, or at least notable to some ancient people, as it appears both as on an ancient slab and as the ancient Mew card. It also has a notable appearance in Lucario and the Mystery of Mew, as a guardian of the Tree of Beginning, a name, again, connecting it to the origin of species and a reference to the Tree of Life. This area is said to be somewhere beyond Pewter City and Mount Moon, and interestingly, the mountains that range from the Cerulean Cave round to Pewter and Mount Moon and all the way down to Pallet seem to be the roaming territory of Mew, as whenever it appears in the manga and anime, it's very often seen around this area. Though that might just be because it's returning home for where it was kept at a time, inside the lab, potentially in Cinnabar Island. Despite being the oldest, so much of these legendary Pokemon are left up to the player's imagination. So many of the canons need to be crossed to draw any conclusions. Over the years, I've crossed all the canons, and actually one of my favorite theories ever is the one that suggests that Mewtwo is the origin of all shadow Pokemon, but you'll need to see that video on its own to understand what I'm talking about there. As for why Mew comes after Mewtwo in the Pokédex, or how and what way these canons intersect, well, for that, you'll have to chill out and relax as I take you through the various theories about Mew and Mewtwo. The nostalgia in my hands right now. Mew and Mewtwo don't just represent the first created legendary and mythical Pokemon in the series, they actually may represent the first ever canonical Pokemon, with Mew It's said to be the ancestor of all Pokemon, and that appears in its Pokedex entries, but how does that work with later additions canonically, like Arceus? Is that a retcon, or is there theories that can explain why these things happen? I know every theory when it comes to Mew and Mewtwo. I've seen most of the videos, worked on a number of them, so I'm going to credit everyone here as I go through these theories and share with you everything there is on Mew and Mewtwo, and there is a lot, because these Pokemon have been around for just so long. We're going to start off with a favorite of mine that I worked on with the Alchemist, but most credit goes to him because he really came up with the majority of this a long time ago now, and it is my favorite theory about Mew. Its first canonical appearance in the games. So since this theory first surfaced, there are a number of ways that you can now get Mew, but none of them are really considered canon, whether that's getting it in Pokemon Go, through the Pokeball Go Plus extension to Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, through having save data of those games on your Switch and getting it in BDSP just gifted to you by some random dude, or even actually in the My Pokemon Ranch game on the Wii. Yeah, I'm pretty sure none of these are considered canon, but there is one canon way that Mew can appear in the main story of the games of Pokemon, and oddly enough, it's in the Hoenn games, in Emerald specifically. If you were lucky enough to get the event item, the Old Sea Chart, then you could make your way to the faraway island, where you can obtain a level 30 Mew. There's not much else on the island. Mew appears to be hiding and running around playfully in the grass, and there's one signpost, and the signpost says, "If any human sets foot here again, may it be someone with a kind heart," and it is with that hope that I depart. Signed in the Japanese with the character for G. It's a faded sign, it's been there a long time with clearly not many people coming to the island, including, probably you are the most recent person since that sign was put up. Who wrote that sign? We'll get to that, but it does reference something very true in Mew's Pokedex entries, suggesting that the entries may have been written by the same person. That simply says that Mew likes to appear to kind-hearted people, that Mew has fine hair when studied under a microscope, suggesting that Mew has been studied under a microscope. And Mew's Pokedex, weirdly enough, references it as the new species Pokemon, and it comes after Mewtwo in the Pokedex. So what is up with that? Well, there's another explanation that appears in one of the later theories, but the explanation here is that Mew literally was newly discovered at the time the Pokedex was created. So in modern day, it was somehow rediscovered, despite being some ancient ancestor Pokemon. This is not too dissimilar to Kanto's fossil Pokemon that were recently resurrected from fossils, also at level 30, much like Mew, and they too are on the end of the Pokedex, along with other speculated to be human-created Pokemon. Mew is very often tied to fossil. Finding a Mew fossil is of course the thing that happens in the first movie that allows them to get the DNA from Mewtwo. Let's tie this Mew into the story of the Gen 1 games. As we know canonically, Gen 1 and Gen 3 are probably happening at around the same time. Is it possible that after the journals we find in the Cinnabar Mansion, suggesting that Mew was there giving birth to Mewtwo, or being cloned into Mewtwo, or its fossil was giving birth, giving life to Mewtwo, that Mew was rescued from the Cinnabar Mansion? I think so, and I think we have our candidates for a hero, because we know that Mr. Briny is the person who obviously brings you to the island, but on top of that, we know that according to Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, that Mr. Briny, Mr. Stone of the Devon Corporation, and Drake all used to sail the seas together. Drake's name in Japanese is Genji, the G, and when you battle him in Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, he does exclaim at the end that you do truly have what it takes to beat him, a pure heart. Making that connection. But how do we connect this group to Cinnabar Island? Well, it's simple. Mr. Stone, a collector of rare stones and the developer of the Fossil Resurrection project in the Hoenn region. You don't think this guy would have sold out a Mew fossil to get that technology for his company to the people at Silphco? Given Devon's dabbling in infinity energy, I wouldn't put it past him, and he probably thought it was quite harmless. He was selling it out to a research lab run by Mr. Fuji or Dr. Fuji, possibly by the gym leader Blaine of Cinnabar Island. He probably didn't think much of it, but then ultimately learned that Mew was resurrected from the fossil and being used in horrendous experiments. And so they, along with the seafaring Drake, who cares about trainers with a pure heart, saved Mew and took it to the faraway island, where it now remains safely away from people, awaiting you. Okay, so now what about Mewtwo? And I love this theory because you can kind of tie it into the other one, and again, just paint that bigger backstory of what's going on in the Generation 1 and 3 games. Why did Mewtwo return to Cerulean Cave, or why did it hide out there? I saved in Cerulean Cave, this is so nostalgic for me. What's your deal? Why are you in Cerulean Cave? I know the reason. Oh, these graphics hit different. They really, really do. I just love the way this looks. Okay, it's all to do with this. It's all to do with the Master Ball. It's all to do with this Master Ball and who wanted it. Obviously, Giovanni, Team Rocket. See, in the original Red and Blue, there doesn't seem to be a lot tying Giovanni and Team Rocket to the story of Mewtwo, but when you take a look at their actions and objectives throughout the game, it's very clear that the two are connected, and we know they are because ultimately in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, Giovanni has Mewtwo on his team. He wanted Mewtwo, and he wanted the Ultra Ball, and this part most people already know. Yeah, we've heard it all before. He wanted the Self Scope so that he could find Ghost Pokemon. That's probably why they interrogated Dr. Fuji as well, Mr. Fuji, because he worked on the Mewtwo project at some point, possibly in the games as well. Actually, that's pretty much confirmed by Dr. Fuji's image being on the wall of the Self-Co kind of scientist lab, the Fossil Resurrection lab that appears on Cinnabar Island in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Anyway, yeah, Giovanni wanted the Self-Scope so that he could find Ghost Pokemon, so that he could hunt down Mewtwo because it had escaped, and ultimately that wasn't going to work, so then he went for Self-Co directly to get the Master Ball. You know that bit, but Team Rocket appear elsewhere in the game, and where do they turn up? Mount Moon and outside Cerulean Cave on the Nugget Bridge. Oh, and in the house where the guy gives you the Dig TM. Why would they want Dig in and around these areas? And yeah, what were they doing looking for the Kabuto and Omanyte fossil in Mount Moon? Mount Moon, of course, being the exact same mountain that Cerulean Cave is part of. The two caves are connected to one another. They weren't digging around looking for Mewtwo because at that point in Pokemon Red and Blue and Fire Red and Leaf Green, Mewtwo hadn't been created yet. They were still searching for its fossil. The Rocket Grunt stole the Dig TM from the guy in Cerulean so they could dig around in Mount Moon and try and find the Mew fossil. And they eventually found it not in the main part of Mount Moon, but in the Cerulean Cave. Why does Mewtwo end up here? Why do you think? It's because it's got a natural connection to the area, because others of its kind, or its original kind, Mew, used to live in these parts. Don't believe me? That ties me on perfectly to the next theory all about Mew. If not on Faraway Island, where might Team Rocket have found Mew? We've got to cross the canons now a little bit, because across every canon, it appears that Mew is most commonly found in the areas between Palettes Town and Cerulean Cave. There's a whole range of there's a bit of mountain and a bit of forest around here, and when you look to every single different Pokemon medium, this is where Mew can be found. In the manga, Mew appears in the forest around Pallet Town. In the anime episode Alola Kanto, it appears in Pallet Town. In Pokemon Journeys, it appears around Pallet Town. The Pokemon First movie is set sometime between Ash's adventures around Kanto and the League, where he's staying in and around Pallet Town. In Pokemon Origins, after capturing Mewtwo in the Cerulean Cave, Red returns home and just realizes that Mewtwo was cloned from another Pokemon. And where do we see Mew? Just outside Oak's lab. Yeah, in Pallet Town. Yeah, what's Mew doing around here? What gives? Why is it such a big fan of West Kanto? What's going on there? Well, one answer might be Professor Oak. We learned this through Pokemon Masters. I told you we'd be crossing canons, the mobile app game, that Mew is Oak's sync pair partner. We actually find on the day out with Mew, the quest, we actually find that Blaine is also there, intrigued by Mew, tying him back into this whole story. And Mew trusts Professor Oak. It's probably seen countless trainers traveling off from this place. It's like people, whose friendship with Pokemon is just beginning to blossom. So yeah, it probably really trusts Professor Oak, and whether escaping the Cinnabar Mansion or coming down from a visit from the Cerulean Cave, Mount Moon area, yeah, it seems that this is the place that Mew has stopped and decided to live, with Professor Oak as Oak's Pokemon. It's actually also possible that this ties into the theory as to what Red was doing on Mount Silver, because yeah, as I mentioned earlier, Mew is after Mewtwo in the Pokedex, and it could be that actually it's Professor Oak who's made that happen, keeping Mew a secret, as Mew is, like I said, Oak's Pokemon. Mount Silver being yet again part of the same mountain range that connects Mount Moon, the Cerulean Cave, and if you travel far enough north, Mount Cornet, where the creation of the Pokemon world started. So it's a place of very special significance, and it's possible that Mew went out there. There's a little tie, and I'm going to cross those canons once again to the anime here, to the TV special Mewtwo Returns, where Mewtwo takes his clone Pokemon away to some special lake that has healing properties for Pokemon, and it's there in the water Mewtwo sees Mew. This actually ties into the most ordinary of items in the game, not some legendary event item or anything like that. The fresh water, an item that heals people in Pokemon, and according to the Japanese, and I only learned this recently, actually came from Mount Silver. This water is a source of life energy for Pokemon, and it comes from Mount Silver, which is all part of that same mountain range area. And I think this whole area from the base of the mountain, which is effectively Pallet Town and Viridian City, all the way up through Mount Silver, through the Cerulean Cave and Mount Moon, up to Mount Cornet, is just the roaming area of Mew naturally in the wild. That's why Mewtwo returns there, and that's how Oak ends up looking after one. Oh boy, here's a weird one. Why does Mewtwo have 2 Mega Stones? Didn't Mega Evolution come about like 3,000 years ago as the result of the Kalos War, irradiating Evolution Stones, or possibly something to do with Rayquaza eating a meteorite? The canon is a little bit unclear. But how does Mewtwo, a modern-day created Pokemon, have 2 Mega Stones? How does it have a Mega Stone at all? Well, the answer to that is simple. They were crafted by Team Rocket, possibly by, again, Mr. Fuji, the suspect that keeps appearing in all of these theories. In Pokemon Origins, we see the kindly Mr. Fuji give Red a Mega Stone for Mega Charizard X. And that's really, really interesting, because when you look at the 2 Megas for Mega Charizard X and Y, it's the only Pokemon other than Mewtwo to have 2 Mega forms. Y definitely feels like the more natural transformation. Perhaps X is somehow artificial. I think this was a study in Mega Stones. And again, it makes sense for Charizard in the canon, because Dr. Fuji once worked closely with Blaine, the Fire-type gym leader at Cinnabar Island. So perhaps studying the DNA from Blaine's Charizard created the Charizardite X that allows Charizard to Mega Evolve into this weird, unnatural form, as a basis for, of course, when Mewtwo would come along to further be able to enhance its power with access to Mega Evolution, and created 2 Mega Stones, the Stone for Y and the Stone for X. And a bit of evidence that really ties this together, in the Rainbow Rocket episode of Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, depending on the version you're looking at, Giovanni uses not just a Mewtwo, but a Mega Evolving Mewtwo. I think this project was commissioned as well by Giovanni, because the whole point of Mewtwo was to have the world's most powerful Pokemon, and to have different ways of augmenting and funneling its power, whether through special armor, or perhaps through Mega Stones in particular timelines. Mewtwo's part human. Mewtwo's part human, and there's just no way around this. This is one of my earliest theories on the channel, and it just makes so much sense. Because Mewtwo is very clearly not a perfect clone of Mew. It looks not that much like it, and in the anime, we see what clones look like. They look a little bit different to their regular forms, but nowhere near as drastically different as Mewtwo is to Mew. And Mewtwo is able to contemplate its own existence and sort of philosophize about the nature of its being, and we get a deeper look at this in its origin story. So you've probably seen it online, the little prelude to the first movie that has Mewtwo sort of as a baby in the cloning, inside its own mind space, chatting to the clone starters, Squirtle, Charmander, and Bulbasaur, other cloning experiments that unfortunately failed, alongside a human known as or Amber 2. While Mewtwo was being cloned, the kindly Mr. Fuji, then Dr. Fuji, was trying to resurrect his deceased daughter in the form of a clone, using her DNA. I believe that her DNA was sprinkled into Mewtwo. And here in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, alongside Mewtwo's tanks, can you see them? 4 smaller cloning tanks. One for Bulbasaur, one for Charmander, one for Squirtle, and of course, one for the human child, Mr. Fuji's daughter. Still don't believe me that Mewtwo's part human? In the manga, Mewtwo is literally made partly from Blaine's DNA, and the two have a psychic connection linking them. And in the movies, Mewtwo is the only Pokemon other than Rayquaza that's capable of Mega Evolution without a human trainer. This is because Mewtwo is both the human and the Pokemon bonded with itself at that point in its lifespan, at peace with itself. It's got a strong inner bond with itself, which is what people and Pokemon need to achieve Mega Evolution. Mewtwo is part human. Okay, this next one's just a nice little buffer from the intensive stuff, and we'll get back to Mew. It's actually a TCG-related theory, and it's not really a theory. It's just something I don't see a lot of people talking about online. It's a Pokemon fact. In my time working with the Pokemon company as Berkey Toby, I was able to do a Pokemon trivia video, and as part of that, they gave me a bit of trivia from one of the TCG artists. This is the card in question. Mewtwo from Shining Legends. It's inside the test chamber, much like the Mewtwo from the Shibuya Pokemon Center. It looks amazing and of course tells the story of Mewtwo's creation. But in a set that came not too later, the same artist, Nishihiro Arita, did another depiction of Mew and Mewtwo Tag Team GX, and we see them with liquid around them and glass shattered. That's because the artist confirmed that this is the follow-up of the same story, except in this version of the canon, it's not a trainer going to rescue Mewtwo, it's Mew. Mew goes to break Mewtwo out of containment, and that's what the glass and liquid is around it. Just a nice little fun one for you. Now let's get back to Mew. We got a couple little short Mew theories that I think are really important because we're going to talk about Mew's ancestry. Mew is said to be the ancestor to all Pokemon life. But then in Generation 4, we got Arceus. Of course, there is a natural way these things connect, and I talked about it in my Tree of Evolution series, if you've ever seen that Mew is the first Pokemon in the Darwinian evolution sense. It was created as an ancestor to most Pokemon, but there are divine Pokemon that are above it. These would include Arceus, Dialga, Palkia, Giratina, and their creations Azelf, Uxie, and Mesprit. And you see in those psychic floating Pokemon a design that's not too dissimilar to Mew. There's actually no concrete evidence bridging these 4 species of Pokemon. It's just high speculation, but it makes a lot of sense that Mew would be born of Azelf, Uxie, and Mesprit to be the progenitor of biological Pokemon life. It just explains not only why they look so similar, but also why Mesprit, Azelf, and Uxie can do that thing where they kind of just disappear. They appear as illusions over the lakes. Mew is also very illusionary and also is able to transform into other Pokemon to disguise itself. Speaking of transform, obviously, we have to talk about the Ditto failed clone of Mew thing. You've probably already heard this one, but there is another version of it that says that Ditto is not a clone of Mew. So, both Pokemon can learn Transform. They both start as pink, but in Shiny turn blue. They both weigh the same and have connections to both Cerulean Cave and the Cinnabar Mansion. Ditto has unstable DNA, and Mew is all about DNA and its story about cloning, and Transform is able to transform you into any Pokemon, which suggests, yeah, a connection to Mew. How are these Pokemon not related? But there are many people out there who discuss the idea that Ditto is not a Mew clone. That's not what's going on here. After all, Ditto can be found in other places, on random routes, in many caves across the Pokemon world, and in fact in a lot of locations that have connections to space specifically. Cerulean Cave is attached to Mount Moon. You can find Ditto in the Great Chasm in Unova, where a meteorite was said to crash down, and you can also find Ditto outside Meteor Falls in Emerald version, as well as the Alola Mountaintops, where we see many Pokemon like Minior and Beldum, Pokemon with connections to space. So what's the deal here? Well, it's possible that Ditto is not a failed attempt at cloning Mew, but rather the original Mew, or the kind of Mew that did become the ancestor to all Pokemon life. Its cellular structure is all over the place, and of course would make for the perfect Pokemon to act as an originator to all species with its mimicking abilities. You ever wonder why Pokemon are called the Cat Scratch Pokemon or the Electric Mouse Pokemon? It's because animals used to exist in the world of Pokemon. We saw it all the time in Generation 1, and Ditto would copy those things, but with Pokemon-like elements, and ultimately created the variety of Pokemon species we see today. And the connection to space? Well, that's because Arceus put these things out all across the cosmos. After all, we see Mew flying in space in the very opening shot of the animated series intro, as well as knowing that there are Pokemon that come from space, like Solrock and Lunatone and Jigglypuff and Clefairy in Generation 1. So what does that make Mew? Well, perhaps it's just the first solid form that Ditto took by potentially even trying to copy Azelf, Uxie, and Mesprit, but failing to sort of do so cohesively. Mew is the first form of Pokemon life. Of course, it's up to you whatever you believe. In my Tree of Evolution series, I actually pinned Solosis as the kind of Pokemon that came from Mew to act as the first single-celled organism that would become the variety of Pokemon life, and this is because its final evolution is very embryo-like inside a psychic cocoon, and Mew is also partly inspired by an embryo. They're both psychic types, perhaps there's some kind of relationship there, but whether it's the Solosis evolution line, whether it's Ditto, or whether it's Mew as the progenitor to Pokemon life, or none at all, and maybe it's all just Arceus, that I leave up to you to decide. If Mew is the most ancient Pokemon though on the tree of evolutionary life, there are going to naturally be some modern day Pokemon that are the most like it, where their DNA hasn't changed so much. There are two great candidates for Mew, those being the Esper line from Kalos. Esper and Meowstic are incredibly powerful psychic cat Pokemon, and Esper in particular is thought to have ESP powers that are incredibly strong. And of course then there is the Eevee line. Eevee has an unstable DNA, kind of like Mew's transformative power, and can adapt to any environment, suggesting that's another way the tree of evolution could have branched out, is through Mews becoming creatures like Eevee. And many of the Eevee evolutions are feline, and of course, I shouldn't have to say it, Espeon. Espeon and Mew are very much alike. Perhaps if Mew is some ancient Pokemon and the form it takes a fossil restored, it does know ancient power, much like many other ancient Pokemon and fossil Pokemon, then perhaps it's the case that Espeon is its closest living relative. Okay, one more Mew one, and then we'll get to Mewtwo, because Mew has connections to space. We've established that already. And there is another Pokemon I mentioned that is said to come from space, potentially. Jigglypuff, very clearly related to Clefairy in the same way Ditto and Mew are connected. Same shiny forms, same weights, similar heights, that kind of thing. Same evolution lines through Moonstones, and connections to Mount Moon. It seems likely in the days Generation 1 that these Pokemon and Mew were probably also quite closely related. And that became most clear in a very modern Pokemon game, Scarlet and Violet, where we met Screamtail, an ancient version of Jigglypuff from another timeline or dimension, boasting an origin date billions of years old, making it the oldest known Pokemon in the entire Pokemon universe. And what's interesting about Screamtail is just the head tail. It looks an awful lot like Mega Mewtwo. Why that's significant? Well, Mega Evolutions, also as a result of Scarlet and Violet's lore when it comes to the Paradox Pokemon, suggests there's some kind of connection between Paradox Pokemon and the DNA they have in connection to a Pokemon's Mega Evolution. For example, Mega Salamence and Roaring Moon, they look an awful lot alike, and in Roaring Moon's Pokedex entries, we learn that connection. Okay, so back on topic here, that would explain why Mega Mewtwo's kind of head tail, which is not too dissimilar to Screamtail's tail, is there, because it's actually a latent part of Mewtwo's DNA that isn't expressing itself, a gene that's tucked away deep down somewhere that came from Mew. Possibly, if we ever saw a Mega Mew, we'd see a form that looks an awful lot like somewhere between Mega Mewtwo Y and Screamtail. Of course, Screamtail gains the Psychic type to join in with Mew and Mewtwo here, and there's one other thought by Viewer Online 101, and this is about Mew and Mewtwo's brainstem. See, with people we have brainstems that connect from our brains to our spine, giving us control over our bodies, but for the sake of Mega Mewtwo Y, that brainstem is now separated from the rest of the body, giving Mewtwo a huge brain and brainstem in relation to the rest of its body, and in fact, this might explain why Mewtwo has effectively a second neck, allowing for more connections from the brain to the rest of the body, giving it greater control of its powers. If you think of Screamtail as doing the same, then that Pokemon is 50% mouth and 50% brain. Okay, final couple Mewtwo theories here. Let's start with the one about Bill. Bill is super weird in the anime series. Of course, we know generally that Bill is the creator of the PC system, but in the anime, Mewtwo appears on his lighthouse door. Now, obviously, he doesn't live too far away from the Cerulean Cave, so perhaps he knew what Team Rocket were trying to create and was helping them locate the fossil. After all, he's said to be one of the biggest Pokemon maniacs in the world. And maniac he is, because he was working with a criminal organization and then taking that science experiment and just putting it up as decoration. But why would he do that? Well, it's because he is a mad genius. Bill didn't just create the Pokemon transferring system, which by the way allows you to transfer Pokemon across, canonically, dimensions using the link cable, which we learn from the Delta episode is the term used for interdimensional wormholes. He worked out interdimensional wormhole travel. On top of that, in Gen 2, he created the time capsule, time travel. This guy is more big brain than the Doctor from Doctor Who. He created interdimensional and time travel, and in fact, possibly helped Giovanni in his Rainbow Rocket arc to try and be successful. Where, I'll say it once again, Giovanni in that arc was successful, has Master Balls to help out the rest of Team Rainbow Rocket, and has not only Mewtwo, but Mega Mewtwo X or Y. Perhaps this is part of some interdimensional power play that we've yet to see, but Bill truly is very suspicious in the anime. How many Mewtwo, though, are there? Obviously, there's different Mewtwo's across different timelines and realities and all the rest of it. We see Mewtwo appearing through the Ultra Wormholes, and in those same games, in the possession of Giovanni, you can transfer as many Mewtwo's to your save file as you want. You can have a whole save file of boxes filled with Mewtwo. Maybe that's what Bill is going for. But in the more localized canon of Pokemon, well, obviously there's the Mewtwo of the Kanto story. That Mewtwo also appears in the Johto games, and it's probably the same one because it appears in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, again in Cerulean Cave. Same Mewtwo in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. There's also a Mewtwo that appears later on in the story in the time of X and Y. It appears in the Pokemon Garden, a secret retreat where it's looking after Pokemon peacefully. And this echoes several anime appearances. Its appearance both in Pokemon Journeys, where it's just looking after weaker Pokemon, and of course in that straight-to-TV special, where it's looking after the clone Pokemon in a secret Pokemon hideaway. Ditto can be found there as well. Interesting. But it's an area for runaway Pokemon, and Mewtwo protects it. This also resembles the Mewtwo that we see in the Genesect movie, which was made to promote the games that had Mega Evolution in it. So it's kind of suggested that across the canons, these two Mewtwo are kind of the same Mewtwo. This represents Mewtwo later in its story, after it's dealt with the wrestlings of why it's here and what it's meant to do. And it's found out that it can use its incredible strength for good and for the protection of other Pokemon. So there's at least 2 Mewtwo, I think, within the story. So in theory, the Mewtwo project has been replicated somewhere else down the timeline. But if you count it as canon, also in the finale of the Pokemon Ranger games, Mewtwo is the ultimate boss. Now, I actually haven't played this game, so I don't know much about it, but it seems to be the case that the evil team have set up a lair inside the base of an ancient civilization. I don't think that implies the Mewtwo is ancient and there's somehow some ancient Mewtwo. That'd be weird. If it is, even as a Pokemon theorist, I don't even know how to begin to tackle that. But more likely, they've just set up a base here and are keeping a Mewtwo here. But this might be a third other Mewtwo, or perhaps it's the origin story for the Mewtwo that appears in Pokemon X and Y. Why you would treat the Pokemon Ranger games as canon, it's only really down to the crossover between the first Pokemon Ranger games and Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, where you can transfer a Manaphy egg. Mewtwo is really very similar across all the canons. There's actually an appearance of Mewtwo that I haven't mentioned, which is the Detective Pikachu movie, where they even mentioned that Mewtwo escaped from Kanto years ago after being created by Team Rocket. That actually ties into a really big theory I have about Mewtwo as the origin for Shadow Pokemon, and ties into its appearance in other canons like Pokken. But that theory is so big, if you want to hear about it, you'll have to... So far, 291 of you have sped in and become Patreons. 291, that's Ninjask. So I wonder what the Patreon version of Shedinja is. Anyway, thank you, you're all amazing.